My name is Colin Smith, pianist and teacher at Wonderland Performing Arts. Today we'll be doing something a little bit different with a dramatic reading and some information about Stanislavsky. Join me. Now then, one of my favorite things to do is listen to other people perform, whether it be a play or perhaps a dramatic reading. A story can come to life in many different ways, be it on the film screen, the television screen, perhaps a performance of some kind, or indeed a dramatic reading. One of the most popular media of our time now seems to be audiobooks. My personal favorite being Sally Field as she reads Alice in Wonderland. Today, I'm going to read the first chapter of something known possibly for its film experience and recent entrance into pop culture. I hope you will enjoy The Never-Ending Story. Carl Conrad Coriander, Old Books. This inscription could be seen on the glass door of a small shop, but naturally this was only the way it looked if you were inside the dimly lit shop, looking out at the street through the plate glass door. Outside it was grey, cold and rainy in November. The rain ran down the glass and over the ornate letters. Through the glass there was nothing to be seen but the rain-splotched wall across the street. Suddenly the door was opened so violently that a cluster of brass bells tinkled wildly, taking quite some time to calm down. The cause of this hubbub was a fat little boy of 10 or 12. His wet, dark brown hair hung down all over his face. His coat was soaked and dripping, and he was carrying a school satchel slung over his shoulder. He was rather pale and out of breath, but despite the hurry he had been in a moment before, he was standing in the open doorway as though rooted to the spot. Before him lay a long, narrow room, the back of which was lost in the half-light. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books of all shapes and sizes. Large folios were piled high on the floor, and on several tables lay heaps of smaller, leather-bound books, whose spines glittered with gold. The far end of the room was blocked off by a shoulder-high wall of books, behind which the light of a lamp could be seen. From time to time a ring of smoke rose up in the lamplight, expanded and vanished in the darkness. One was reminded of the smoke signals that Indians used for sending news from hilltop to hilltop. Apparently someone was sitting there. He said, "Do your wandering inside or outside, but shut the door. There's a draft." The boy obeyed and shut the door. He approached the wall of books and looked cautiously around the corner. There, in a high-worn leather-winged chair, sat a short, stout man in a rumpled black suit that looked frayed and somehow dusty. His paunch was held in by a vest with a flower design. He was bald, except for outcroppings of white hair over his ears. His red face suggested a vicious bulldog. A gold-rimmed pince-nez was perched on his bulbous nose. He was smoking a curved pipe, which dangled from one corner of his mouth and pulled his whole cheek out of shape. On his lap he held a book, which he had evidently been reading, for in closing it he left the thick forefinger of his left hand between the leaves as a kind of bookmark. With his right hand he now removed his spectacles and examined the fat little boy who stood there dripping. After a while the man narrowed his eyes, which made him look more vicious than ever, and muttered, "Goodness gracious." He opened his book and went on reading. The little boy didn't know quite what to do, so he just stood there gaping. Finally the man closed his book, as before, with his finger between the pages, and said, "Listen, my boy, I can't abide children. I know it's the style nowadays to make a terrible fuss over you, but I don't go for it. I simply have no use for children. As far as I'm concerned, they're no good for anything but screaming, torturing people, breaking things, smearing books with jam, and tearing the pages. It never dawns on them that grown-ups may also have their troubles and cares. I'm only telling you this so you'll know where you're at. Anyway, I've no children's books, and I wouldn't sell you the other kind. So now we understand each other, I hope." After saying all this, without taking the pipe out of his mouth, he opened his book again and began reading. The boy nodded silently and turned to go, but somehow felt that he couldn't take his last remark lying down. He turned around and said, "All children aren't like that." Slowly the man looked up again and removed his spectacles. "You still here? What must one do to be rid of you? And what was that terribly important thing you had to tell me?" "It wasn't terribly important," the boy said, still more softly. "I only wanted to say that all children aren't the way you said." "Really?" The man raised his eyebrows in affected surprise. "Then you must be the big exception, I suppose." The fat boy didn't know what to say. He only shrugged his shoulders and turned to go. "And anyway," he heard the voice behind him, "where are your manners? If you had any, you would have introduced yourself." "My name is Bastian," said the boy. "Bastian Balthazar Bucks." "That's a rather odd name," said the man. "All those B's." "Oh, well, you can't help it. You didn't choose it. My name is Conrad Coriander." "That makes 3 C's. "You're right." He puffed a few clouds. "Oh, well, our names don't really matter, as we'll never see each other again. But before you leave, there's just one thing I'd like to know. What made you come bursting into my shop like that? It looked to me as if you were running away from something. Am I right?" Bastian nodded. Suddenly his round face was a little paler than before. "I suppose you made off with somebody's cash box," Mr. Coriander conjectured. "Or knocked an old woman down, or whatever little scamps like you do nowadays. Are the police after you, boy?" Bastian shook his head. "Speak up! Whom are you running from?" "The others." "What others?" "The children in my class." "Why?" "Well, they won't leave me alone."
"What do they do to you?"
"They wait for me outside the schoolhouse. They shout all sorts of things and push me around and laugh at me."
"And you just put up with it?"
Mr. Coriander looked at the boy for a while disapprovingly. Then he asked,
"Why don't you just give him a punch in the nose?"
Bastian gaped. "No, I wouldn't want to do that. And besides, I can't box."
"How about wrestling? Or running, swimming, football, gymnastics? Are you good at any of them?"
The boy shook his head.
"In other words, you're a weakling."
Bastian shrugged his shoulders.
"But you can still talk. Why don't you talk back at them when they make fun of you?"
"I tried."
"Well?"
"They threw me into a garbage can and tied the lid on. I yelled for 2 hours before somebody heard me."
and now you don't dare. In that case, you're a scaredy cat too.
Bastian hung his head. Bastian said nothing. He just stood there in his dripping coat. His arms hung limp at his sides.
What kind of things do they yell and make fun of you?
Oh, all kinds. Namby-pamby, the pot cracks up. I guess it's 'cause I weigh a lot.
Not very clever. What else?
Screwball, nitwit, braggart, liar.
Screwball? Why do they call you that?
I talk to myself sometimes.
What kind of things do you say?
I think up stories. I invent names and words that don't exist. That kind of thing.
Can you say these things to yourself? Why?
Well, nobody else would be interested. Mr. Coriander fell into a thoughtful silence.
What do your parents say about this?
Father doesn't say anything. He never says anything.
And your mother?
She's dead. At that moment, the telephone rang. With some difficulty, Mr. Coriander pulled himself out of the armchair to answer it. In the next room. Bastian stood there. He didn't know why he'd said all those things. He listened to the mumbling from the little back room. He didn't know why he had admitted so much. He hated being questioned like that. He broke into a sweat as it occurred to him that he was already late for school. He'd have to hurry. Oh, yes, he'd have to run. But he just stood there, unable to move. Something held him fast. He didn't know what. He could still hear the muffled voice from the back room. It was a long telephone conversation. It came to Bastian that he'd been staring the whole time at the book Mr. Coriander had been holding, that there was now lying on the armchair. He couldn't take his eyes off it. It seemed to have some kind of magnetic power that attracted him irresistibly. He went over there and read the title. He picked up the book and examined it from all sides. It was bound in copper-colored silk that shimmered when he moved it about. Leafing through the pages, he saw the book was printed in 2 colors. There seemed to be no pictures, but there were large, beautiful capital letters at the beginning of the chapters. Examining the binding more closely, he discovered 2 snakes on it, one light and one dark. They were biting each other's tails, so forming an oval. And inside the oval, in strangely intricate letters, he saw the title, The Never-Ending Story. Human passions have mysterious ways, in children as well as grown-ups. Those affected by them can't explain them, and those who haven't known them have no understanding of them at all. Some people risk their lives to conquer a mountain peak. No one, not even themselves, can really explain why. Others ruin themselves trying to win the heart of a certain person who wants nothing to do with them. Some are so bent on winning a game of chance that they lose everything they own, and sometimes sacrifice everything for a dream that can never come true. Some think their only hope of happiness lies in being somewhere else, and spend their whole lives traveling from place to place. Some find no rest until they have become powerful. In short, there are as many different passions as there are people. Bastian's passion was books. If you've never spent whole afternoons with burning ears and rumpled hair, forgetting the world around you over a book, forgetting cold and hunger, if you've never read secretly under the bedclothes with a flashlight because your father or mother had some well-meaning person has snitched off the light, and on the plausible ground that it was time to sleep because you had to get up early, if you've never wept bitter tears because a wonderful story has come to an end and you must take your leave of characters with whom you've shared so many adventures, whom you've loved and admired, if such things have not been a part of your own experience, you probably won't exactly understand what Bastian did next. Staring at the title of the book, he turned hot and cold, cold and hot. Here was just what he'd dreamed of, what he'd longed for since passion for books had taken hold of him. A story that never ended. The book of books. He had to have this book at any price. Well, that was easily said, even if he had more to offer than the bit of pocket money he had on him. This cranky Mr. Coriander would never give it away, and certainly would never sell him a single book. The situation was hopeless. Yet he couldn't leave without the book. He listened to the mumbling from the little back room. In a twinkling, before he knew it, he had the book under his coat and was hugging it with both arms. Without a second, he backed up to the street, keeping an anxious eye on the other door, the one leading to the back room. Cautiously, silently, he turned the door handle and closed it behind him. Only then did he start running. The books, pens, and pencils in his satchel jiggled and rattled to the rhythm of his steps. He had a stitch in his side, but he kept on running. The rain ran down his face and into his collar. The wet cold passed through his coat, but he didn't feel it. He was hot all over, but not from running. His conscience, who hadn't let out a peep in the bookshop, had suddenly woken up. All the arguments that had seemed so convincing melted away like snowmen under the fiery breath of dragon. He'd stolen! He was a thief! What he had done was worse than the common theft. That book was certainly only one of its kind and impossible to replace. It was surely Miss Coriander's greatest treasure. Well, it was all he had left in the world now, because, naturally, Bastian couldn't go home anymore. He'd stopped running. Walking slowly, he saw the schoolhouse at the end of the street. Without thinking, he was taking his usual route to school. He passed a few people here and there, yet the street seemed deserted. To a schoolboy arriving very late, the world around him seemed to have gone dead. At every step he felt fear rising within him. He always thought of his school years as a prison term with no end in sight, a misery that would continue to grow until he grew up, something he would just have to live through. But when he now passed through the echoing corridors with their smell of floor wax, the lurking stillness suddenly stopped his ears like cotton. This was no place for him, he realized. He would have to go away, so he might as well go at once. But where to? He read stories about boys who ran away to sea and sailed out in the world to make their fortune. Some became pirates or heroes. Others grew rich when they returned home years later. No one could guess where they were. I wonder, he said to himself, what's in a book while it's closed? Oh, I know it's full of letters printed on paper, but all the same, something must be happening. Because as soon as I open it, there's a whole story with people I don't know yet and all kinds of adventures and deeds and battles. And sometimes there are storms at sea, or it takes you to strange cities and countries. All those things are somehow shut up in a book. Of course, you have to read it to find out, don't you? But it's already there. That's the funny thing. I just wish I knew how it could be. Suddenly, an almost festive move came over him. He settled himself, picked up the book, opened it to the first page, and began to read. The Never-Ending Story. Now then, I know that my tea is cold, and if you made some, I'm sure the same could be said for you. Let's start by learning a little bit about Konstantin Sergeyevich Stanislavsky. Russian-born in 1863, he was a seminal theater practitioner, widely recognized as an outstanding character actor, and the many productions that he directed garnered him a reputation as one of the leading theater directors of his generation. His principal fame and influence, however, rests on his system of actor training, preparation, and rehearsal technique. Stanislavsky, his stage name, performed and directed as an amateur until 1933, when he co-founded the world-famous Moscow Art Theater with Vladimir Nemirovich Danchenko, following a legendary 18-hour discussion. And they think I can talk. Its influential tours of Europe, around the US, and its landmark productions of The Seagull and Hamlet established his reputation and opened new possibilities for the art of theater. He collaborated with the director and designer Edward Craig and was formative in the development of several other major practitioners, including Vsevolod Meyerhold, considered his sole heir in theater, Yevgeny Vagantaganakov, and Michael Chekhov. At the Moscow Art Theater's 30th anniversary in 1928, a massive heart attack on stage put an end to his acting career, though he waited until the curtain fell before seeking medical assistance. He continued to direct, teach, and write about acting until his death a few weeks before the publication of his first volume of his life's great work, The Acting Manual, An Actor's Work, published in 1938. He was awarded the Order of the Red Banner and the Order of Lenin, and was one of the first to be granted the title of the People's Artist of the USSR. Stanislavsky wrote that there's nothing more tedious than an actor talking about himself, and they should be banned from doing so. All that said, he did indeed write a biography. So let's talk a little bit about the 7 steps of the Stanislavsky method, popular in Ms. Allison's classes. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. These are the basics of understanding a character and bringing it to life. This is a rigorous process of artistic self-analysis and reflection. The system of acting developed out of Stanislavsky's persistent efforts to remove the blocks he encountered in his own performances, beginning with a major crisis in 1906. He also introduced a period of discussion, entailed analysis of the play by the cast. Despite the success of this approach, particularly with naturalistic stagings of Chekhov and Gorky, he remained dissatisfied. Now then, let's get into it, shall we? Number 1, of course, is who am I? Start with the basics and then fill in the gaps with your imagination. Pick apart the scripts to find out what type of person your character is, what they look like and what they believe, how others describe them, and so on. Think about your character's past and the significant events and people that influenced them and made them who they are in the script. You cannot merely say, I am Mr. Colin, and I bore people by talking a lot. That simply isn't enough. You must describe who they are, what they look like, and how others describe them. These are interesting concepts because, well, it's always fun to think the best of ourselves and think about what people think of us. This is an activity that lends you an eye into the script, into the plot, how the other characters perceive you, and for pourquoi. Number 2 is, where am I? The script will usually lead you to believe where you are. Heavens. The script will usually tell you where you are, but the important thing for an actor is to consider how the character feels about the place that they are in. Characters act differently in public than they do in private. People move differently when they are cold versus when they are hot. The space your character occupies can determine how they behave during a scene. Number 3, what time is it? Heavens, it's 10:15. Year, season, month, day, and time of day should all be described. Think about the specific time of the play changes along the plot. This can change the character's action. If it's set in Victorian England, voice and proper etiquette will be different than San Francisco in the 1960s. Number 4 is, what do I want? This is a character's primary motivation for everything they do in a scene. All actions should be executed with the goal of getting what you want from the other characters in the scene. Acting is reacting, of course. This is also called a character's objective. Number 5 is, why do I want it? Why? Well, there must be a driving force behind your objectives on stage and on screen. That is your justification. We all have reasons for doing what we do, and characters are no different. Give your character a convincing reason for acting, and you automatically generate high stakes, which leads to tension. Number 6, how do I get what I want? Use your dialogue, movements, and gestures to influence the other characters to give you what you want, in essence, accomplishing your objective. This is also called a character's tactic. If one tactic fails, try a new one and see if that works. Let's back up a bit to high stakes. Miss Allison likes to sort of chain together a series of questions that make you come up with some fairly sensible answers. Why do we go to school? We go to school to learn. Why do we learn? So that we can later get a job. Why do we need a job? To get money. And why do we need money? To buy a home and help support the family. And if we don't, then we starve and we die. So, going to school is important. You're welcome, America. These are the high stakes which Stanislavsky speaks of. This leads to tension. What are you willing to do to keep going to school? How do you wish to continue attending? If a giant troll blocks your way every morning, you have to find a way around him to get to school. Otherwise, you'll never learn. And so the high stakes grow as the character moves on. You use your tactics, your sneaky abilities, your gestures, your thoughtfulness, or your emotion to make the other characters react to you in order to get what you want. These are tactics. If one tactic fails, try another. Now let's move on to number 7. What must I overcome to get what I want? There's always something stopping you from achieving your objective. Cold tea, for example. Usually there is something in the outside world impeding a character's advancement and also some internal conflict with which they struggle. Find it, or what they are, and fight against them within the scene. This also is called the character's obstacle. So, going back to the high stakes, you have an objective to get to school. You use your tactics to get around the obstacle. Does that make sense? These 7 simple questions can provide hours of work for an actor to fully answer. The flip side is that an actor puts in the time and energy will inevitably have a great understanding of their character and their personal acting technique. Take them, learn them, and think about them. That is why Stanislavsky asked them. What are they again? Who am I? Where am I? What time is it? What do I want? Why do I want it? How will I get what I want? What must I overcome to get what I want? Thank you for joining me on this very long video. I will leave you with a quote from George Bernard Shaw. Life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. Hear, hear.